Today, a sigh of relief when the Reserve Bank left the cash rate exactly where it is. So the official interest rate remains at 4.35%, but there are fears it could still go higher next year. I asked Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor whether he thinks that rates might actually have reached their peak.
Well, I don't get into making predictions about the Reserve Bank. What I will say is the decision today hasn't made life any easier for hardworking Australians, Chris, who have seen 12 interest rate increases under Labor. We're absolutely at the back of the pack in fighting inflation. We've got amongst the highest levels of inflation of any advanced economy. The Economist tells us it's the most entrenched. Household disposable income's back over 5% in a year, which is the worst in the advanced world. And Australians are really feeling the pain, and we're seeing that on the ground, whether it's households or small businesses. Indeed, I've been at food banks right around the country in recent months, and you're seeing people at food banks who you would never expect to see. People with jobs, people with mortgages. There is a lot of pain, and it's going to be a grim Christmas financially for a lot of Australian households, Chris.
Yeah, it's really tough for a lot of people. What worries me is the government and the Treasurer and Jim Chalmers seem to be talking like spectators. They seem to be talking about this cost of living crisis and the inflation problem as something that's just happening to Australia, something they can't control. Yet they've got record high rates of immigration, which fuels all of this. They're doing nothing but pushing energy prices up with their crazy energy policies. That fuels the inflation of everything. General government spending out of control, even through schemes like the NDIS. I mean, these are ways that the government is fueling inflation, and they don't seem to be doing anything to pull it back.
Well, exactly right. So they've had the wrong priorities and they've made bad decisions. In terms of priorities, they've been focused on other issues. I mean, it's clear that Albanese running around the world focusing on all sorts of issues, Chris, but not the issues that people are talking about around the kitchen table. They're certainly not the issues that are being talked about around the cabinet table, and Australians are paying a high price. Now, whether it's they're spending $188 billion of extra spending since they came into government, $7,000 for every Australian. And just because you've got high coal prices, that doesn't excuse that kind of increase in spending. And meanwhile, they're killing off the coal industry, of course, with avoiding approvals. But it gets much worse when you look at energy policy, their failure to deliver on the $275 that they promised, industrial relations, where they're putting union bosses between employers and employees at a time when we need employers and employees sitting down and working out how to make businesses more productive, not less productive. Competition policy, where they've been looking after their mates, and we saw that with Qantas. I mean, these are exactly the wrong decisions when you're fighting inflation. We know historically you have to pull every lever at your disposal to beat inflation, and that's why we're at the back of the pack versus other peer countries right around the world.
What about petrol excise? In government, you gave people relief, temporary relief on petrol excise. Doesn't the government have room within its budget to do that now? And wouldn't that help relieve pressure, not just on fuel itself, but on so many other things that rely on that input?
Well, the problem with Labor's homegrown inflation, because homegrown it is, as the Reserve Bank Governor has told us, is it's a tax on everything, Chris. Not just on fuel, but absolutely everything. Inflation drives up the price of everything. And so if you want to beat it, you've got to go to the source of the problem, which is all the things we were just talking about. So whilst putting more money in people's pockets through fuel excise might sound good, the problem is it's not actually solving the inflation problem, and you'll see price rises elsewhere as a result. So we know from the past, we've seen bouts of inflation in Australia and around the world in the past. You've got to get to the source of the problem. There's no point putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. It won't work. There's no point going to the symptom rather than the source. You've got to get to the source. And the policies that I've talked about, we know from historical experience are the way to beat this. We've beaten it in Australia in the past, but you don't beat it with a government that has the wrong priorities and is making the wrong decisions.